joining us once again for the Lakes International Comic Art Festival. Definitely one of the longest named cons that we have here in the UK, but also one of the best. So, it's a pleasure to have you with us again. My name is Chris Thompson. I work with Titan Comics and I do the Pop Culture Hound podcast. But the person that you've come to really hear from is Joe Kelly, who is my wonderful guest today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Now, I'm guessing that you all know a bit about Joe's work, which is why you came along. So we'll get more into it and kind of delve into how all this began and a little bit of your history and backstory, I guess.
Sure.
One of the things that was really interesting to me in researching for our chat today was that you were actually listed and credited as being a writer and a penciler. And I had no idea that you did art, but you actually did a Master of Fine Arts. Is that right?
Well, I was never a penciler by any stretch. I do have an MFA, but it's in writing.
Right.
So yeah, I was an art student in my undergrad years, and I went to Binghamton University, which is a New York State school, and I was an art and theater major, and also a major in beer, and that sort of made me then become a philosophy major, so I could get out in time. And I sort of let the art drop a little bit. So then I took a year and I worked in production in New York and decided carrying heavy camera equipment was maybe not for me.
Right.
My arms are about that big around, and decided to try to write. So I got into the NYU dramatic writing program, and that's where I got my MFA. So I think there's a colorist actually named Joe Kelly in the sort of history of comics also. So sometimes we get and a Red Sox pitcher also,
Yeah.
which I'm not.
Well, anytime I was trying to Google Joe Kelly, I just kept getting his picture first.
Yeah.
Which is going to be really annoying. So,
Yeah.
come on, I'm the man of action.
Well, it's fun when it's on Twitter and he's trending because he's done something outrageous or great. I'm like, hey, look, I'm trending on Twitter. But it's never me.
So, without kind of putting the cart before the horse, if we go back a bit earlier than when you sort of started studying, what were you like as a kid? Because I'm guessing from your career trajectory that comics and cartoons must have been big for you when you were younger.
Absolutely, yeah. I was definitely a super nerd well before it was cool. My wife will happily tell you I wore Mork and Mindy suspenders well into my teens. I unabashedly loved all that stuff, and didn't really get beat up too much, so that was good. I inherited a bunch of comics from an uncle who was just like, here, I don't want these, and devoured those and read them over and over. Mostly, he had a lot of horror books, so a lot of House of Mystery and Witching Hour, a lot of Spider-Man, Superman, obviously, and then I was like 6 when Star Wars came out, so it all fed into my little impressionable brain. So I drew a little bit and always was kind of a writer, and enjoyed words and enjoyed creativity, and had a lot of very good teachers who encouraged that sort of stuff at an early age. In fifth and sixth grade in particular, had just great teachers that would let me do sort of whatever I wanted. So if we had to do a history report, I'd be like, well, can I do it in a costume and make it myself and all that sort of stuff? And then they'd send me to other classes and running around in tights. And before it was like cosplay was a thing, so it's a little embarrassing now, but I'm okay.
Are there pictures of that as well?
God, I hope not. I really hope not. And then so I sort of stuck, and I was a good student, so kind of hung more with the nerdy crowd. But luckily, my friends all branched out into sports, so I wound up with a well balanced bunch of friends.
So were you actually making your own comics at that point? Because you said you were drawing and stuff, so were you actually creating that early?
Yeah, the first thing I remember drawing was trying to draw Empire Strikes Back from memory.
Right.
So that was, of course, brutally awful. And but then, I would design characters mostly, and cook up ideas. I never developed a skill for visual storytelling. It just wasn't something that I had sort of thought, oh, I could emulate this or try to figure it out. But I enjoyed drawing and teachers and bosses and things that you couldn't really do anything about. So I'd make cartoons about the man, the people in charge, and then give it to my friends, and we'd all have a good laugh. And that would be the sort of way we'd get it out. So the seeds of all my career probably were planted at that time. But yeah, I really did want to be an artist. That was a visual artist. That was definitely my goal.
Yeah. But you just felt you didn't have quite the skill set for it, so you were like, well, how can I take part in this if I can't do that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, going into school as an art and theater like double major, I was exposed to a lot of great stuff in the theater program. Binghamton is really more of it's the preschool. It's pre-med and pre-law. It's exceptional. It's an exceptional school. For art, it was probably not the best choice for me to go at that time. So I had to sort of carve my own way. But I had some really great professors who specifically did. I had a great sculpture professor who called me on my laziness all the time, which was great. It was very good to have somebody like that. And I had a guerrilla theater teacher who forced us to put on, random shows in public, which were very disturbing. But it was good to sort of force you to get out there and to see what your immediate impact on people with your art can be. And so those things all sort of fed together. And I was writing plays and got a little bit of recognition at that point too. So it all helped gear me more towards writing. And then, like I said, then I found the drink, which was slowed me down a little bit, but luckily it got better.
So what were you actually thinking of career-wise at that point? Did you kind of have a plan with all that?
No plan. There was no map for me. My father, who was a policeman, always wanted me to have a backup plan, right? The safety plan, which I actually do recommend for people. When people come up to us now and ask about writing and being an artist or whatever, we tell them all the same thing. It's very important. You have to have passion. You have to follow your dreams. You have to put the work in. But it's okay to have a survival job. There's no shame in that. There's nothing bad about that, because the idea of being the starving artist, that is very romanticized, is not fun in real life. Like, you want to be able to have heat and a place to live and food. It will actually help your art to be able to eat. So he wanted me to, he literally was like, become a plumber. Everybody always has to go to the bathroom. Be a plumber. That's very logical advice, Dad, but I don't think that's for me. So I really had no plan. I came home from Binghamton. I graduated. I taught driver's ed for a summer, which is terrifying. To really put children behind the wheel of a car is awful. But luckily, I had the brake on my side, and you got to keep the car. So that's when I was dating my wife. I'd pick her up in a driver's ed car with a big giant yellow sign on the top. And it was awful.
Was that in your Morgan Mindy suspenders?
Yes, with the Morgan Mindy suspenders. I was a class act. I was a catch. And then after, I did like production though. I enjoyed my now brother-in-law. I worked for him. He's a commercial producer. So running around Manhattan and learning the different aspects of production, I sort of felt that I was either going to go in the art department direction, because that got back to sculpture was what I really loved, or write. And then I got to NYU, got into NYU, and that made a big difference right there. The decision was made. But even then, none of us knew. It was a very small class. It's only 20 people in the graduate class. And we all hoped we were going to write, but there was no guarantees for sure. And then Marvel Comics they reached out to our department, and a couple of young editors who, they were just tired of having the same talent pool, so they wanted to try to find new folks. And I was close with the secretary, who had learned to read through Superman comics, which we had nice conversations about. And she said, there's a letter from Marvel Comics sitting on the director's desk, and it probably will go in the garbage. So maybe you should do something about that. So I stole it and read it, and saw they wanted to do a workshop, and then I put it back and said, oh, hey, I heard Marvel contacted you. That's interesting. What is it about? And then I volunteered graciously to run this workshop. And I always tell the story because I do not encourage mail theft. It's a felony in most countries. But when those opportunities pop up, you have to grab them. You know, you have to put yourself out there. And if any, I don't know how many folks here would like to be writers and artists, but if we're sort of introverted often by nature, and you have to put yourself out there, and it's very uncomfortable. But when you see the opportunity, you got to go for it. You have to say hi. You have to sneak in to steal a letter sometimes. You know, you have to do those things to put yourself in the positions where cool things can happen. And then by helping run that workshop, I got my first job at Marvel. And then the second year we ran the workshop, Brian K. Vaughan was our discovery. So it was, you know, for the 2 years we ran it, it was pretty successful.
Yeah. Well, and again, I guess following up what you were saying, you know, people need to create their own opportunities and what have you, but they've also got to do the work, because here you were, you know, this opportunity came, but you didn't then just sit back and go, well, this workshop's going to be great, I'm going to enjoy doing that, you know, as in being part of it. You were actually running it. So you were putting in the work to create your own opportunities.
Absolutely. And, you know, I mean, at the time I was certainly obviously writing every day for school anyway, writing screenplays primarily. And what you need to do, you know, if you want to be in that business, you need to write every day, draw every day. Even if it's 15 minutes a day, you know, you can always find time. And that's how you build up your skills. And, you know, like you hear somebody say, you know, you have to draw 100 bad pages before you get to one good one, all that sort of stuff. It's all true. And so yeah, it did follow up with a lot of work. And luckily they took a chance on me. And then it was trying to work for Marvel, work at NYU, because I had a job there, graduate from NYU, get married. This all sort of happened in a year and a half period.
Yeah.
So it was a very good time, though. Probably the hardest I ever worked in my life. Now I'm a lazy guy.
So how did the transition happen? Like, can you give us an idea of what the workshops were like, and then how that actually led to getting paid gigs at Marvel?
Sure, they had a really nice way of doing it. It's kind of backwards from how because I teach now, so every once in a while I go back to NYU and teach the comics class or the writing for animation. They started with the micro and went to the macro. So it just started with, they would give you a blank page, and you just had, not blank page, a page of art. So it was like an issue, it was like Ron Garney Hulk or something. And with no dialogue. And you had to just come up with what was the dialogue for the scene. And then they would teach you about dialogue. So it was always like, try it first, then we'll teach you about it. And we went from dialoguing all the way up to building a series by the end. And it was a great way to learn the ins and outs of just how a comic is built.
Yeah.
And then through that, they saw that I had a little bit, I love dialogue. So it's one of my it was my primary focus certainly at that time as a writer. I was learning plot, and I was learning the craft of storytelling while at school, but dialogue kind of came naturally. So that was what gave me my first job, because Carl Kiesel had to, he was on a deadline crunch on, it was Fantastic Four 2099, which I don't even know if this book's ever made it over here. But they had an issue, and they needed a dialogue pass on it. So that was my actual first job. And then kind of once you're a warm body and they see that you produce on time, there's always a late book in one of the big two companies, always a late book. So then you get offered this and you get offered that. And they start with small things like what ifs or Marvel fanfare. And then once they see that you're reliable, then it's what about Daredevil? You know, and then get to that. And then it became Deadpool. You know, you start getting more opportunities.
So they were actually teaching you Marvel method though, as well, the style and approach by the sound things.
Yeah, absolutely. Although they were never dogmatic about it.
Right.
You know, it wasn't you have to do it. You know, if you don't know the Marvel style versus full script style, Marvel style traditionally was you just sort of loosely lay out what the story is, send it to the artist, and then they can sort of do whatever they want. Then you go back and do dialogue. And they taught us how it worked, but they, like I said, weren't dogmatic about it. So when I started writing for them, I sort of had a modified version, because I always felt that I knew the dialogue I wanted to at least try. So I would include it as sort of prose, and I thought it was helpful for the artist, so they know how much area to leave. Because if you know my comics, I like to chatter a lot in my books, especially Deadpool. So I thought it was important.
So sort of keep that same style as far as how your scripts go, or have they changed drastically over the years, how you write a script?
They've changed over time. I just found that the screenplay format is so comfortable for me that, especially after going to school for it, that it's just easier. So I put panel one, not panel one, I put the page number. There's no format, by the way, if you're interested in writing comics. You can literally do whatever you want. You can paint it in on napkins, like nobody really cares. As long as you're conveying what needs to happen from panel to panel, and you understand what fits in a panel, and then you have your dialogue. So I put down the descriptions, but I don't break it down by panel, so that if an artist wants to play a little bit, they have the flexibility to do so. When you label it panel one, panel two, it feels very locked.
Yeah.
Unless I need a specific effect. So if I need a multi-image shot, or I need a staccato, like I need 9 beats that are all very small, that sort of thing, and I'll explain why to the artist. But otherwise, it looks pretty much like a film script.
And did you kind of settle on that because it's a bit easier to flick between different forms? Because I mean, you're writing for animation, for comics, for film, for video games as well, I think. So, I mean, they're all still very different mindsets and approaches, but I guess having a familiar template, maybe, does that make it easier for you to flick that switch?
A little bit. I mean, ironically, if you write for comics, you can pick up a lot of bad habits for the other ones. Because with comic scripts, we can write, I mean, like, notoriously, Alan Moore could write a 60-page script for a 22-page comic, right?
Yeah.
I could describe the leaf of every leaf on this plant, and, this lovely lamp over my head. You could describe all that stuff and have, I mean, my scripts tend to clock in probably around 30 pages, for a 22-page comic or a 20-page comic. You can't get away with that in any of the live media. It has to be this page a minute approximate, or an animation page is kind of 30 seconds to a minute. So all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, all those words I used to put, now it's just, they run, or jungle, period, that's it. But yeah, I do like the form. I like how it looks. Probably somewhere in the back of my brain, it's sort of this childish thing of like, oh, it looks like real writing, as opposed to, prose, which I would like to do as well. I just don't have a lot of experience with prose.
So is that something you've started dabbling in then? Have you got your sort of unfinished novel that you're working on, your version of Jerusalem? Or?
Yeah, I have done a little bit of prose. A friend of mine, one of the producers on the I Kill Giants movie, his wife works for Penn USA, which is a literary organization, and she has a small magazine, so asked me to contribute a piece. And it was great. It was a chance to give it a shot. It was like just 25 pages, but it was really fun, and made me want to give it a try. Plus, I love collaborating. Working with artists is fantastic. When you're working on cartoons or films or TV, then the collaboration is times 1,000, and you sort of can get lost in that. So it's very appealing, the idea of writing prose and just going like, all right, this is just me for a little while, and let's see how that goes. But I know that's also a long haul, so that has to be do a little every day, let it sit for a while, kind of deal. So it'll be a while before there's any novel with my name on it.
Well, you didn't have the luxury of time when you started at Marvel, because everything just seemed to sort of happen at once. Is that how it felt for you as well? Like, were you sort of, I can't even enjoy this because I'm just riding the wave at the moment?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, you're afraid every second you're going to get fired. You just want to do a good job. I mean, at my most, I think I wrote 4 books a month at Marvel, which to me it would be inconceivable now. Although I probably do that much writing in general. But yeah, it was a lot, and that last year really was graduate, get married, start the X-Men. That was a heck of a summer. I mean, it was a bit nutty. And I still have panic and terror attacks now all the time in my mind, going, I'm gonna screw this up and it's gonna be awful. But you just get through it. And if anything, experience just teaches you this will all pass. Eventually you get through it quicker. All the writer's block and all the things that we experience, you just go, yeah, whatever. That's the fake. I'll just push through.
Well, you're doing well yours so far? Everyone here looks really engaged, so it's going well. It's all right there.
I hope, or you're asleep. Very quiet. With the spotlight, I cannot tell.
Yeah, no, I can't see that. I'm just assuming.
They've all left. Oh, you could hear.
I could hear. All right, that's good. So you were saying that obviously you started working on Deadpool at Marvel,
Right.
and what's interesting is he turned up in New Mutants first, was in X-Force, and then they did that first mini-series. I think it was Fabian Chesum wrote it, and that's like all of that stuff is entirely different to what he's now become. In fact, it's really strange if you kind of give that to people who have a concept of who Deadpool is now. But when you came on and did it, that was when the tone really changed. So was that something that you brought to it? How much of it was you being told this is what we want, and how much was you going, this is the way this character should be?
It was definitely the latter. I was very lucky because I was a new writer. I'd only been there just under a year, and Matt Idelson was a relatively new editor. He had been an assistant for a while, and we worked together on some of the what ifs and that sort of stuff. So they gave him Deadpool because, honestly, they literally said this book will be canceled in 6 months. So just do whatever you want, and so he did, and he took pitches from a bunch of people. A lot of people focused on the version of the character that are you saw in New Mutants. Just this sort of gritty assassin. Let's just see what sort of killing spree he'd go on, that sort of stuff. And Mark Waid had also done a miniseries, and I remember really distinctly the moment where, in the middle of the battle, somebody yanks off Deadpool's mask, and he freaks out. He just stops fighting. He wants his face back, and I found that amazing. I thought it was a riveting little moment, and the psychological underpinnings of the character for me started with that. And then I like humor, and my pitch, which ultimately got scrapped for Deadpool, was all super humor based. I mean, it was really, let's just take the most obscure characters in the Marvel universe, and Deadpool will fight Obnoxio the Clown and Ego the Living Planet, and just all this total chaos. And at the time, Heroes Reborn was happening, which was a miniseries where the whole universe had been taken into a ball. And I wanted him to have that ball, like he was going to basically knock over Franklin Richards and have this blue ball just because he's mean and would steal a ball from a kid, and not know he had the entire Marvel universe bouncing it off of walls and losing it and all this sort of stuff. And he was going to be hunted. That was the original pitch, and it was just sort of wild and out there. And Matt decided to give it a shot. We scaled back. They said, well, you do the fun stuff, but just not all the side characters. Take some of the stuff that's existed. So the relationship with Siren, which had been established in those miniseries. Some of just the idea of what does it mean to be a mercenary. So then we made up Hell House and all that sort of stuff that kind of evolved. So yeah, it was kind of the only way I knew how to approach that character, because if he was gonna have his own book and be an anti-hero, there had to be something redeeming about it. And so for me, it was the psychology and the comedy together sort of worked it out. And this idea that Deadpool, you always want your sort of operational theme, right? This sort of overall driver that if you start, especially if you get lost in the weeds, you go, well, what is this book going to be about? And Deadpool was always a guy who wants to be good, but is constitutionally incapable of being good. And on the rare occasion when he does the right thing, the universe kicks him in the balls for it. That was how he defined Deadpool, and it worked out okay. It sort of stuck, and we got 33 issues out of it, and a bunch of annuals and all that good stuff.
Well, when you put it that way as well, the correlation between Deadpool and Spider-Man, I think, becomes more apparent. It's almost that's kind of Peter Parker's story in the sense of he's essentially, as you put, he's always getting kicked in the balls, basically. But they're like two sides of the same coin. So I guess it's interesting that you have been writing the two of them together again.
That's been a challenge, just to make sure they each get their their time in the sun, and they're both funny, but in very different ways. So who gets to be the sort of the straight man in which episode has been a great challenge. But it's I love them both. So like Spider-Man was my absolute favorite character growing up, hands down, still is. And then Deadpool being cornerstone
Well, you had a really good run as far as, you know, having Ed McGuinness doing the book with you, and in fact, if I think of all your collaborators, you've always had these great artists that you've worked with.
I've been very lucky. I really have.
But one of the ones, and I hadn't even realised this, I hadn't remembered, but when you did Daredevil, it was actually coming on with Gene Colan,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which, you know, what was that like? Because that's, you know, he's kind of that comics royalty,
Yeah.
even at that stage. So let alone, you know, now in hindsight, it was like at that point, he was a legend already.
That was great. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that when I first got the job, I didn't know who he was. So then I had to go and look back, and then I was like, oh boy, he's like a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
oh boy, you know. And he was very funny, and it was great working with him, and it was a great experience. And at one point, he had called me up, and he's a very nice guy, and he's like, yeah, I just want to ask you about these scripts. I was wondering, could we do it at like Stan and I used to do it? And I'm like, well, I don't know what that means, but you know, how did you do it? He says, well, he would just call me up on the phone and just kind of tell me Daredevil fights some bank robbers and there's a guy with extra arms and go do something. And I said, I don't think they'll pay me to do that. I don't think I'm allowed to do that. So I have to keep writing scripts for you. He said, okay. And he was a good sport about it. But it was funny to hear, you know, because at the time, I mean, when you think about how quickly people used to work, you know, and you look at Kirby's output or somebody who could crank out, you know, a book a week, and with quality, you know, and part of it was because of the speed and just the fun and let's just go by the seat of our pants, and it wasn't quite as meticulously figured out. So, yeah, but it was very cool, and that really did start. I mean, all my collaborators, I've been so lucky. I mean, you know, Pasquale Ferry is one of the first people I ever worked with. I mean, he's incredibly talented. We're still friends today. You get Ed McGuinness, you get, you know, Pete Woods is great, then Walter McDan. I just, everybody I got was fantastic. I just kept, it was an embarrassment of riches. So.
Which is nice.
Yeah, then, you know, then, oh, by the way, here's X-Men, and you get Carlos Pacheco. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
He even says, Herman Garcia, you know, who doesn't do comics anymore, but he was an incredible talent. I met a lot of folks in Spain and was able to sort of collaborate with them as a result. And you know, so I was one of these lucky people that got to work with European artists before people realized you need to work with European artists, which is excellent.
Well, and you mentioned X-Men there, and I think at the point in time when you were at Marvel, I mean, that was the sweet gig to have, was
Yeah.
X-Men. It was kind of, it's not quite the same anymore, but it was that thing that once you got X-Men, I mean, you had made it. I assume it was also the case of, what do you do after that? Because you just essentially got the biggest game in town.
Yeah.
But you got that, and you were doing, were you doing X-Men and Steven Seagal was doing Uncanny, or was it the other way?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve was on Uncanny.
Yeah.
And Steve will be the first to tell you he had already been doing comics for many years, and he was so excited and finally got X-Men. And then who was this idiot that had just been in comics for a year, this punk, who all of a sudden was going to get the other X-Men book. So he hated me immediately, and then we met and hit it off, and you know, like a brother to me. Yeah, it was a little bit mind blowing actually to get that job so quickly. And then it was a great gig, and at the time, you know, Marvel went bankrupt shortly after we got that job. So the tenor of the office had changed. So Steve and I were on basically for 15 months, and we had a great time. We had a lot of great plans and things we wanted to do, and then you start getting into the editorial of it, and all we ever asked was just let us write our own stuff. You know, if you need something changed, we'll change anything you want. And then every once in a while we read pages that we didn't write, and that would get frustrating, and then bumping heads a little bit about what the stories were going to be and pushing those rocks uphill, and so they finally had said, you know, we would like to try it a little differently, and we're going to tell you the stories we'd like to do and have you guys execute them, which is a completely acceptable way to work. It's how a lot of television works. You know, people will break this, or we work that way in animation. We break the story and give it to the artist.
Yeah.
But it wasn't what we signed on for. So when we were the first people, I think, to quit the X-Men, maybe then, like you said, it's the big book, right? So then I felt like I had to leave Marvel, and I still had 9 months on my contract, and I had a baby coming 3 months later.
Wow. Okay.
And I said to my wife, like, I don't think they're even going to give me anything. I don't know what's going to happen. So can I quit? And she said, I have faith in you, and you're going to be okay. And it was the best gift she ever could have given me, because I think if I had stayed just to burn out the contract, it wouldn't have been a good, the work wouldn't have been good. It would have been bad all around. And then I left, and that's when actually we did steampunk, and got into DC, and started a whole nother journey. And it's really because my wife has always been extremely supportive. She's a normal person, as we like to say. She's not a creative. She has a real job. She's a guidance counselor, and she's done every age group. She's currently in elementary school. But when I graduated and I was getting married, I think all of my writer friends were more excited I was marrying somebody with benefits than I was actually getting married. That was the big move. You can have health insurance? All right. So that was, she's always been my number one fan, except when I write about her in the comics, which happened. So when I was on Superman, the editor would say, hey, how are things going at the Kelly house? So they're good. Why? Why are you asking? It's like, well, Lois and Clark are kind of fighting a lot. And that would happen a lot. I'm very shallow in that regard. It's instant in, instant out onto the page.
Goodness me, that suddenly makes steampunk. It just makes me go, what was
Yeah.
going on at that moment in time?
Yeah, there's a lot of, that's when you get into the really, really scary psychology of my
Yeah.
brain.
Well, so since you brought it up, how did the timeline work at that point? Like, did steampunk and that sort of stuff that you were doing come first, or did you get into DC and then that came afterwards?
Yeah, I met Chris. Like you said, when you're on X-Men, especially at that time period, just being on X-Men all of a sudden, it's not you, it's the characters, right?
Mm.
So we were invited all over the world, and it was incredible. So Steve and I went to Australia, and that's where I met Chris Pacello.
Right.
And we hit it off well, and I loved his art. And he was working with Steve on Uncanny, and he had asked me if I ever heard of this thing called steampunk, which at the time I hadn't, and looked it up and read a few bits of steampunk fiction and kind of got it. And he wanted to do something in that milieu, so we gave it a shot, and I really enjoyed doing that book. But everybody turned it up to 11. It was just the art was at 11, the dialogue was at everything,
Yeah.
even the lettering. I mean, Richard Sarking's. I've never seen a book where almost every other word is a different font for a character, and we really went over the top. It was great, but it was a lot of work, and because it was a cliffhanger book, they had a very good deal at the time. A creator-owned deal that was very favorable for the creators, but your threshold for sales was pretty high.
Right.
And it was such a unique book in a weird world that really, if we had been a Vertigo book, we would have made it all the way to the end that we wanted to do, the full 24 or 25 issues. But as a cliffhanger book, we were made it halfway and kind of had the literal cliffhanger. And there's every once in a while we talk about kind of trying to finish it.
Yeah.
I knew the ending. Like, we had it worked out, we just weren't able to do it. But that started, and then I met Eddie Berganza at San Diego, and he was a fan actually of Steve's X-Men, but got us confused. So once again, my idiot luck, I tripped into a job, and it wasn't until months later he was like, "Oh, I didn't like your X-Men. I really wanted to hire Steve." And eventually Steve also worked on Superman, but yeah, that's how I got that job. So sometimes it works in your favor.
So there's sometimes a little bit of blind luck. Some of it's having a good supportive partner, and
Yes.
and the rest is making your own opportunities.
Yeah. The blind luck, I feel like, has probably been my key. I've stepped into a lot of these sort of crazy situations. I mean, being in the right place when that letter showed up at NYU. I mean, it's just a perfect example. But and then getting in and doing the job, well, theoretically. So, and I loved working on Superman. It was a great time. So yeah, that coincided, overlapped a little bit.
Now there's lots that you did at DC, and we haven't even got to Man of Action yet, which I really want to get to talking about that. But you mentioned a story just in our email correspondence before the festival, something about the rat of the week. And I was just like, all right, I'm asking about that. I don't even know what the story is, but
Sure.
I'm sure it's good. You mentioned it.
Well, so sadly, I'm sure you've seen a lot about our politics lately, and there's been quite a bit of it on TV. And there's a fellow named Joe Scarborough who, I don't know if he would be on TV over here. I think he's on MSNBC, but he's a conservative kind of guy. And this was a long time ago, so it was at the beginning of the Iraq War when the UN hearings were going on, and they were just showing blurry pictures and saying, "There's weapons. We know we've seen them. They're in this blur." And you know, we were disturbed by that. At the time, I was on JLA, and when I took over that book, you know, I think it was just Justice League kind of up to that point, and then we put Of America back into it. And then I felt like, well, if we're going to put America in the title, we should not shy away from political stuff. I love comics as a subversive medium and as a way to sort of introduce, hopefully, a conversation, not just an agenda, you know, is always the goal. So watched these UN hearings and getting sort of aggravated and thought, well, we have an opportunity. Lex Luthor was our president, not because of Bush. We actually had picked it before. We had a president in DC Universe before we did in our country, because they were still counting Chads. And it was, if you remember, that was a bad time. So Lex was president just because we thought it would be cool. And so we did a story of, you know, him wanting to start this war in Iraq, which is the DC equivalent of Iraq. And Superman was like, well, just what's the proof? You know, I just want to see the proof. And people were being called un-American if they asked questions. And, you know, you sort of have the democracy built on people questioning authority. And so then, you know, people who asked questions disappeared, and Batman was gone, and Wonder Woman was gone, and he wakes up, and it was a nightmare. You know, oh, thank God that could never happen in, you know, in our country. That was the whole story. So the way comics are done, especially when you're on time, which DC tends to run more on time, takes about 8 months for the book to come out. So wrote it then I don't know if any of you remember, but then there was the Mission Accomplished banner, right? So George W. Bush is on an aircraft carrier, and mission accomplished, and we're done. Look at that, we won a war in 8 months. And then our book comes out. And people thought, because they don't know how comics are made, that we just saw that and were like lefty liberals that were angry at George Bush and wrote this thing. So Joe Scarborough had a section on this widely watched news program called Rat of the Week, where they call out some awful person. And DC Comics was Rat of the Week for this issue, using Superman as a liberal mouthpiece to forward this anti-war agenda. And it was interesting because, I mean, it was fun. I was glad to, you know, I like rattling the cage a little bit. But it caused an interesting ripple, and a conversation did happen. Somebody who was a super conservative fellow online reached out to me and wanted to do an interview. And I said, I'll talk about anything you want. I'm okay with that. And you know, he said, well, if they ever find weapons of mass destruction, would you apologize? You know, and I said, well, A, I don't know that they will, but B, I wouldn't apologize, because what we wrote at the time was really asking this question of, am I un-American for asking questions? That's what it was about. And we had a great conversation, you know, and that to me is the power of the medium. If you can have that conversation with somebody, that's wonderful, you know. Not everybody wants to have, obviously, politics in their comics, but there's a long history of that sort of stuff. I mean, you look at the Green Arrow, Green Lantern run is the easiest example. Denny O'Neil's run, you know, talking about issues that were going on in the country and drug use, and yeah, everybody's done that stuff. So it's great to be able to do it. For me, I like to do that.
So you're obviously a man of politics, but then you became one of the men of action.
That was an excellent transition.
I was curious as to how that actually, you know, happened, and how you settled on the group of guys that became the team. Like how did that all evolve, and what was going on externally at that point in time that motivated that?
Sure. Well, no one else would have us. That's no. Well, part of how it started was we were watching how badly comics creators were treated in Hollywood. Sometimes for legit reasons, but more often than not, we were just being dismissed. You're not a real writer because you write comic books, and it's we tell stories the same way your television writers do, or the same way your film writers do. So we thought if we made a company, that would be helpful. That companies like to talk to companies. That did not entirely bear out to be true for a long time, but that was the theory. And the way it really started was that I had met Duncan Duncan Rouleau drew Juggernaut one shot I did. Him and I hit it off very, very well. We were phone friends for years before I ever met him in person. Steve Siegel and I worked on X-Men. Joe Casey came on with Cable, and they all already knew each other. They all live in LA, and they all had mutual friends, and so they were already kind of a unit. And we decided to try to make it official. And I had a friend who had a business card. He's a books on tape guy. So if you look up Scott Brick on Amazon, he's read like every book. He does all the Dune books. He's very high up there in that world. But he had a business card at the time that said brain surgeon and rocket scientist, which I thought was pretty great. So I was like, well, what's the complete opposite? Oh, man of action. So all I ever do is sit around all day. And that became it. I got the name for a little domain. I was like, well, do you guys want to spot? You can have a spot, and then we started that. And then San Diego Comic-Con. I don't know if anybody's ever been. It's a little bigger than this, and it's very, very unpleasant, to be honest. I mean, it's like Mecca of comics in some ways, and you get to see a lot of really cool stuff. But it's draining. Like you just are on your feet on concrete for days. And so we often say that we started a company to have a place to sit because we could get a booth and we could have some chairs. But then as soon as we hung out the shingle, we started getting offered work. It was kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
Somebody asked us to do short films right away. They were trying to sell them into movies, so we wrote some short films. A video game company came to us about X-Men Legends, which is an old Activision game, I think. With Raven was the publisher, or was the developer. And then Cartoon Network, we had a friend who used to work at Wizard Magazine, and he's Matt Senreich, who's a co-creator of Robot Chicken, if you know that show. So Robot Chicken is the grandfather of Ben 10. He was working with some folks over there at Cartoon Network, and they were looking for new talent, just like Marvel. They just wanted to try some new people, and they brought him over, and we said, all right, we'll pitch you 20 ideas in 20 minutes, because there were 4 of us, and that sounded very Hollywood and cool. And then we had to go make up 20 ideas. We did not have any ideas for the boys' action cartoon we were looking for, and we did. And I pitched it I was on the phone. They were all in the room, and we had a little buzzer. And if we couldn't get the time, pitch out in a minute, we'd go on to the next one. And if the guy didn't like it, the executive didn't like it, he would just go, oh, I had something with like werewolves and planes or something, and it's like, I hate werewolves. And then eventually we got to this kid that could, at the time the pitch, it was actually a much more complicated idea, but it was, he switched places with himself from alternate universes where he had powers. And he's like, I like that. And I wish I could say it was number 10. It wasn't, it was like number 8. But that ultimately became Ben 10 after many years of development, and gone from that crazy sci-fi thing with superheroes to aliens is where they ultimately landed. But then once we had that, the company sort of was solidified. So again, a little bit of luck at being in the right place, and needing a place to sit kind of helped us get a job. And then we started to branch out from there.
It's true, I've noticed that as well. I've actually walked past the booth at San Diego a few times, and always just seen you guys just sitting there. It looks like a really good place to actually hang out. It's kind of, I don't think they're selling anything. I don't really know what's happening, but these guys are having fun. They're hanging out.
It's true. We always wanted to bring a couch. We never quite got to that point. But that's the thing. San Diego, for some people, you really go there to sell. And there was a time where I think you met new fans. You could actually sell books. it's such a big all pop culture fest, and it's all over the town, and it's 150,000 people. We don't really, we have the books there, and we hope that you sell them, but it's more to meet people and say hi. And we actually just gave up the booth for the first time in 16 years. I think we decided we'd had enough because it was just, it's not very cost effective either. You know, if you're not selling books, which we often are not, it's an expensive proposition.
So where did you go sit this year?
That was awful. Awful. We had to walk. No, we sat at Image, and then we sat out at the convention.
Oh.
So it was actually fun. We found places to sit.
One of the things that's really interesting with Man of Action as well is the crediting of stuff. Because I kind of, at least from what I've seen with things like Ben 10 and whatever, it's just credited to Man of Action. It's not really, you know, you guys aren't so specifically named. Was that a deliberate thing?
Yeah, we decided really early on, and it took a while to get there. I'd be lying if I said it was like out of the gate. We were all like, yeah, we're going to do this great socialist model. And it wasn't really the case. It took some convincing, but we felt like, it was sort of fun. It was just kind of a fun thing, a little bit of mystery of like, what does this mean, Man of Action? And Steve likes to say that the four of us, our four brains make up the brain of one man. So, you know, that's why we're only Man of Action instead of Men of Action. But it was the idea of like the rising tide lifts all boats. You know, we just wanted to sort of try to build a company, see what would come of it. We still always obviously get credit on our own writing and things like that, but if we work in teams, we work all four of us, we have all sorts of weird, mysterious ways that we kind of put things together, so it's just easier instead of going, this is a Joe and Duncan project, or this is a Steve and Joe project. Man of Action, you know, and then if we need to, for sometimes it's legal reasons, and you know, you don't get paid right if you don't have a name on something, then you'll put a name on it, but, and certainly our comics work is always just us.
Yeah.
Because we decided that it was just more comfortable keeping that carved out. But whenever we can, it's, you know, Men of Action, and it's worked out really well, and I'm very proud of that actually, because it's not something that, you know, egos had to get put aside for that to happen.
Yeah.
And it's worked out very well.
Well, one of your other collaborators, well, I don't know, I'm going to ask, I guess, about this, but there's another famous person who has worked on Ben 10, at least in my mind, and that's Alex Winter, who played Bill in the Bill and Ted films, if you've ever seen those.
Yes.
Now, I know he did some stuff with Ben 10, maybe it was a live action.
Yeah, he did the live action.
Did you get to work with
No,
Alex at all?
I didn't. I've met him once or twice.
Right.
But no, I didn't get to work on those, unfortunately. But the guys did go to the set, and I think their big thrill was actually seeing the $6 Million Man. They were very happy to see. Now I'm blanking on.
Lee Majors?
Yes, Lee Majors as Grandpa Max. That made me kind of excited.
Wow.
I would have been probably more excited to see Bill.
See Bill. Yeah. Wild Stallions.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of can't stop yourself from doing it. It's really hard. Try to be professional.
I guess it's probably good, you know, that you were like, don't let me go there.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good.
Steve is very good at keeping us in line. Steve Siegel's very buttoned up. So, and all these guys from LA, they don't get really that impressed by celebrities and stuff. I still get giddy. Oh, he was on TV. They're over that. They live there.
And one of the other things that you've done is, now is it MREX or is it GenRex? Because I remember it was a comic first, and there was like a couple of issues, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of preview issues I seem to remember. You know, and they're the ones I always see, you know, now. But
Right.
then it got turned into an animation as well.
Yeah, so we did, it was MRAX originally. It was published like a sub-imprint of Image at the time. And, you know, it's that funny thing about comics. I think Brian Haberlin, who was our publisher, was sort of hoping like, oh, you know, they have Ben 10 and they have other comics and, you know, still doing mainstream stuff. That'll translate to this little indie book. And it just did not. It just did not at all. We sold like 3,000 copies or something. And so it was not financially supportable, unfortunately. So we did literally 2 issues, but you know, like we tell everybody, the work is never somehow you find an audience, or somehow you find a way to get it made. And that happened to be Duncan and I working on that project together, and we had done so much work. And so when we had opportunity to pitch another show to Cartoon Network, we offered up a more kid-friendly version of the story, which actually was relatively darker because Cartoon Network at the time wanted to do more. They were trying to get the teenagers. Because what basically happens in animation is that you go from watching Ben 10 to Family Guy. Like, that's it. There's nothing in between. That's it, except for anime, and they didn't have anime really.
Yeah.
So so they wanted something that gave in between, and that became Generator Rex, which was a little heavier. And then by the time, because cartoons take a year to make, so from the day we started to the day we finished the first episode, that edict had changed completely, and they just wanted comedies. And so then it was, well, how many times does Rex not look at the camera, or somebody's hand is in front of their mouth, so you can be like, now I'm gonna say something funny, and take this show that was banned in Germany, by the way. So if you scare the Germans, you scare the show. We were banned. We had to make funny and add some stuff there. So, but I love that show. I really love Rex. I just saw a great Rex cosplay actually at New York Comic Con. I was kind of surprised. My son sent me a great photo. But we loved Rex, and we loved that he was lead character, Latino lead character, and just diverse cast. I mean, everything about that show we really liked, and we got almost 60 episodes out of it. So it's a short run, but it was a good run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you've done all this animation work, but in the midst of it all, you've still kept your hand in comics. So
Sure.
you've been doing your own books with Image, and these ones very much credited to you. Was that sort of deliberate to always keep your hand there and to have something that was just yours?
Oh, 100%. It's very important. As we all love comics. It's what got us involved in all this stuff to begin with. It goes very far back for all of us as children. I mean, we're huge fans and are always reading, what's new. And Joe Casey is like very prolific with comics. He just cranks them out. He's super fast. Steve is very disciplined, so you get like a solid book a year, sometimes two out of Steve. I'm a flake. I try really hard to put out books frequently. I'm not as good, and then Duncan's super slow, but is working on a lot of stuff. So yeah, we absolutely always wanted to stay in comics, and once Joe Casey got us into Image, and once we had the opportunity to really do what we wanted and explore all the themes that we wanted, it was fantastic. So I Kill Giants was the first thing I did at Image, which for me has been huge and emotional, and it's a very personal project. Four Eyes, I love, as slow as that book is. Max Fiumara he did a lot of work with Dark Horse, and so he kind of went off the grid for a little bit. But yeah, we're always going to do comics. I mean, it's what we love.
Yeah. Well, and what I love is being able to talk about all this stuff, and unfortunately we're running a little short on time. But before we do finish up, I wanted to sort of ask about what else is coming up, because we've really just glanced over your career. I mean, there's no way to do it service in an hour, but what is coming up? What's happening right now, and what can you tease for the future?
Sure. Well, let's see, right. So Man of Action right now, we have the new Ben 10. So Ben 10 reboot just started airing in Europe, and will show up in the States in a few months. That's been a lot of fun. We're executive producers on that, so we're very thoroughly directly tied to the creative as opposed to sort of the first iteration. We developed a Mega Man cartoon that hopefully will see the light of day. That's been really cool with Dentsu and DHX. Working on a couple of video games that unfortunately I can't talk about, shooting the I Kill Giants film right now, so in Dublin and Brussels, which is doubling as America, which is fascinating. So it's set on Long Island, New York, so I've been calling it Long Ireland, and that's been working out pretty well. And then trying to write more books, and then next year in the spring, I'll have a book through Image with Ilya, who's here, called Kid Savage, which I'm really excited about. It's been a long time brewing, and it's sort of Hanna-Barbera homage, which the cartoons that I grew up on, but certainly modernized, and just really fun action adventure, all ages book. So yeah, there's a lot coming down the pike, and then just another project with Ken Nomura for sure. We haven't done another book together because we keep, I think, over politing each other, going like, well, what do you want to work on? What do you want to work on? But we both want to try to make sure we get something in the can sooner rather than later. But he's also very busy, which is great.
Yeah.
And then right now I do Spider-Man Deadpool for Marvel, which is not, it's for the foreseeable future. I don't know, we'll see how long it goes. But the second arc is already kicked off, and we get fill-ins because we're a little slow. But the first fill-in is written by Penn Jillette, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
If you're gonna get somebody to fill in, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So and that's been a really fun run. So yeah, a lot going on.
Well, I think this has been a really fun run today, and I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this hour with us, Joe, and for everyone joining us. It's been a real privilege to.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.